Hi and welcome. As the government continues to take on the LTTE in the north, the last few kilometers of territory are proving to be the hardest to get. Fighting is heavy and losses are high on both sides. Civilians, the people of the area, are inevitably caught up in all this, and addressing their concerns has emerged as the greatest challenge for the government at the moment. Getting food and supplies up to the north is one aspect of this, and with the opening of the crucial A9 highway, the first food convoy made the journey using this route on the 10th of March 2009. Another key area is meeting the needs of thousands of displaced with shelter, clothing, health and education facilities. The government has begun to implement rehabilitation programs for the Vanni displaced with several partners. We spoke to the country director of the UNDP to find out more about their role in the recovery process.
Hi Douglas, thanks for agreeing to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Just speaking of the North, since that is on everyone's minds and that's where the focus is going at the moment. What are the challenges in addressing the escalating humanitarian crisis that's happening in the North?
Well, I think right now what's happening is, at least from UNDP's perspective, again, we're not a humanitarian agency. We're certainly not a political organization. We're looking at what comes next for these internally displaced persons. And many of them, as you know, are still trickling out. There's still a big number, as you know, and that you've covered in your programs. The ones that are in the camps in Vavuniya, the ones that will be in the camps in Manic Farm. The big question for us is not how much food do we need to get them, how many blankets and how many temporary shelters do they need, but what happens next when they're either returned to their, or allowed to resettle back to their places of origin, and if not, what is our plan then? Because if they're not allowed to go back, if they're not allowed to leave those camps, if they're not allowed to have some freedom of movement, whatever livelihood support or food security support that we provide, it's not going to go too far within the confines of a camp that they cannot leave.
Now the UNDP has indicated plans to support an early recovery process. Now what do you mean by this exactly?
We're involved at a stage where communities have resettled, they've returned to their places of origin, and they're ready to get their lives back on track. And that means no longer receiving food, handouts from others. Producing their own food is what all beneficiaries want. They want their dignity restored. They want jobs to earn their own income. And that's what we do in early recovery. And there are a number of agencies and actors throughout the government and the UN system and the NGO community that are at present providing early recovery support. But there's a need to make sure that we're all coordinated, to minimize the overlap, to focus on those gaps where the international community or the government might be missing. And that's why coordination of early recovery is very important, especially at this key stage now, and especially in the East, where the humanitarian stage is kind of coming to a close, where the early recovery needs are growing tremendously by the day.
How effectively would you say this is being carried out?
Well, I think in many cases it's still too early to tell. In the East, for example, we're only now coming to a stage where, you know, the humanitarian actors are starting to pull out, where these communities, you know, there were over about 170,000 returnees in the eastern province alone last year. Most of them were given 6 months of food supply, during which the international community, UN, UNDP, FAO, ILO, agencies like that, again, under the overall authority of the government and guidance, is trying to help them get back onto a track of normalcy. And so, for example, the harvests, we made sure to try to get our seeds and equipment in time for the rains. And many of the communities that we've reached out to in terms of food security, helping them, you know, reestablish basic capacity to produce their own food, are working. Is there tremendous need still that we haven't gotten around to meeting? Yes, tremendous. And that's why it's important that at this day and age when so many eyes are focused on the North, that we make sure not to forget about the needs in the East.
We're apparently at the brink of the end to the war, and so I think the focus needs to shift to what happens next. And so what do you think? What does it take to push this process to completion? What do you think it'll take?
Well, I think, you know, we have to look at really two situations here, one in the East and one in the North. And it's very important that we not lose the focus on the early recovery needs in the East. It doesn't take too much right now to push it to completion. That situation is beckoning for support that helps these returnees, these resettled communities, to take that next step on the track towards normalcy. Jobs, investment, food production, markets, that's what they need right now. The North is a different situation, and let me reiterate, the key question of how much freedom of movement these IDPs will have will determine really, you know, how involved or how much support, early recovery support, the international community can come up with. Again, the simple reality is you can provide all the vocational training to an IDP, but if they're not allowed to use those skills, you know, for getting a job outside or near their home, it makes no sense. So I do expect there will be some discussion in the coming weeks and months, much of it revolving around what the government policy will be in terms of granting or to what extent these IDPs will be granted freedom of movement. For us as the development community, we're all watching that very carefully.